I'd like to call the June Borough Board meeting into start, please. If we could just all rise and say the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everybody for coming today. We were initially supposed to have 2 presentations, but the street permit office canceled at the last minute, so now we just have the Department of Health. I'd like to welcome you. Before we get started though, one of our dear friends, Dana McGee, this is going to be his last meeting after serving for 29 years on CB2. Succeeded them as chairman, and he did a wonderful job, moved things along very expediently, always kept the meetings in control. So Dana, we are all gonna miss you. I just wanna take the opportunity to thank you for your service. You now belong back to your lovely wife. But thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Worth it, thank you.
So, Department of Health, I will turn it over to you. Do you guys have any more of the booklets?
Yeah.
If not, we can just scan them and send them to you tomorrow. If there's...
And they're available online.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this. So, thank you all for inviting us or allowing us to present to you today. My name is Sharon Gwynn, and I am Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Epidemiology within the Health Department. I'm just going to get this set up so I can control this. And so I'm here to talk to you about our community health profiles. We do this every few years. I wonder if any of you were here last time they were presented, when Dr. Bassett came? Okay, great. So that was in 2015. So we released these early 2019, aiming for 2018, and gotten that just to update them and try to make this type of information available to the community. I'm here on behalf of the Health Department, Dr. Borough. We're going around to all the different service cabinets and boroughs to make you aware of these tools, walk you through some interesting findings, and answer any questions you may have about them. I think I'll just kind of go into it, but feel free. I know that you had 2 presentations, now you just have one, me, right? Do you have other business after this? I just want to make sure I'm cognizant.
We do have other business
okay,
after this.
so I'll try to keep it to a half hour.
That's fine.
Okay. So, as you all know, there are 59 community districts in Manhattan, 3 in Staten Island, and so we wanted to develop community health profiles for each of the 59, and I'm going to talk to you about just 3 of them, but you're welcome to check out all of the other ones and see how Staten Island community districts compare. We didn't bring copies of all of them, we just focused on Staten Island, but we have all of the information available on our website, which is easily accessible. So this is a very interesting map, and I just wanted to present this to you to give you a little bit of context of how we approach the way we talk about health in communities. And the fact that the neighborhoods are really a result of policies and laws that have created communities. I actually just became familiar with this map when this slide set was created for me to present with you, but this is a map of New Amsterdam, and it shows apparently there's an area called the Land of the Blacks, and the Land of the Blacks is where Black people were allowed to own property in the 1600s, and in 1661 this map is from, and they were allowed to own property there as a buffer against the Indians and Native Americans who were attacking the white people. So that's the reason why they were allowed to own property there. So that's a policy and a law that resulted in a group of people living in a certain area. And then what ended up happening through my searching on the internet, I found out is that the rights to own property were revoked as a result of an uprising. And so what actually I think remains of this land is the African burial grounds downtown. So a little bit of interesting history, but it really just show you how people are living in areas as a result and have resources in these areas as a result of the policies that happen around them. And so a later example of this is redlining. How many people have heard of redlining here? So redlining happened in the 1930s, and basically it was a way for banks to decide who to give money to, loans to own property. And so they went through, and this map on the left shows you the grades that were given to different properties. And so what you see here are that the higher grades are the green, and the lower grades are the pink. Okay, and then so basically neighborhoods that had high percentages of Black people or people with illnesses like TB or immigrants were given lower grades, but the neighborhoods with a high proportion of white people were given higher grades. And so they were allowed to borrow money and own houses and end up living in an area that had people like them in that area and give those properties to their descendants and so on and so forth. And so the map on the right kind of shows the impact of those policies today. And so what you'll see is there are high proportions of white, as shown in the red, white populations in areas that align with the higher grades. And so it shows how policies impact neighborhoods and people, and it shows how it also results in segregation, economic and racial segregation here. And so this is really the foundation for a lot of the health department's work, because that segregation and the economic disenfranchisement results in health impacts, both as a result of disinvestment in communities, lack of resources, and kind of the impact of living in disenfranchised neighborhood on people. And so fast forward now, we see that those same areas, mostly areas in the Bronx and areas in Brooklyn, have the higher percentage of poverty, as well as higher percentage of premature mortality. Premature mortality is defined as death before 65 years of age. And so that's what we gauge as kind of the minimum kind of lifespan that any person should have. And so when you die before 65, that's not good. So, and that's how we measure. That's how we measure kind of mortality rates in New York City. So we have again designed these community health profiles to really target communities. We've designed them to talk about resources that exist within neighborhoods. So you probably will end up seeing things in this community health profile that you don't normally think of as a health issue, maybe like school absenteeism or incarceration. But we believe that things like this, indicators like this in the community really have an impact on health. And so we wanted to put them all together to describe the health of the community. So in doing that, we wanted to provide these communities so that people in the community and you as community leaders can use this information to better understand the challenges that exist within the community and maybe use data to leverage resources to improve the community. We also want community-based organizations to understand and use this information to write grants, educate communities. We certainly want the general public to know about these data, and coordinate with others. So that's really the idea of these profiles. So this is the table of contents, so you'll see that on the first page. And these are kind of, it's organized by the different domains that we are looking within health. So we have a general page about who you are, some background about understanding health inequities that kind of walks through some of that stuff I just described earlier about the policies that impact health, social and economic conditions, housing, community neighborhoods, maternal and child health, healthy living, healthcare, and then we end with health outcomes, really kind of showing how the community factors all kind of build and result in poorer health outcomes. We also want to just underscore that a lot of people think about health as a very individual factor, like I smoke or I eat fast food, but we want to think about health as a neighborhood factor. So what are the conditions in the neighborhood that's resulting in poor health choices? So it's more of a social determinants of health issue rather than an individual issue. And it's really how we interact with our neighborhoods that results in some of the choices that we make. And if we're going to really address some of the health disparities, we really need to think more holistically about health when we think about health. So, how do you read the profiles? We use a color coding system that allowed us to identify for each profile, identify the community district with interest, which is in the darker blue, the borough that the community district is within, which is in more teal colored. So, for example, I have the St. George Stapleton community health profile. The teal is Staten Island. The lighter blue is New York City. And then we always want to show the community district that in the city, that's what we call the most has the most favorable outcome, the best rate, just to show kind of the difference between a lot of the community districts and some of the ones that don't have the best outcomes compared to the ones that may have better outcomes. So sometimes the most favorable is the highest rates. So for example, if you do more physical activity, that's better than doing less. Sometimes it's the lowest rate. So having lower infant mortality rates is better than having higher infant mortality rates, which I know makes complete and total sense to you all, but sometimes when you're looking at these, it gets very confusing because you're looking at a lot of numbers. So that's why we try to point folks in the right directions, and sometimes we use arrows to help readers understand. So our goal is really to make this data accessible. We use very very interesting and clear infographics so that people aren't looking at a bunch of charts and tables, and hopefully they can kind of easily glean the information out of these profiles that we'd like them to. So the first section, as I mentioned, is who we are, and this is actually for all of Staten Island. We just made that for today because we're talking about all three profiles, but in each profile we'll have a section on who we are. So, and we wanted to provide the basic demographics first because neighborhoods are always changing, and it's really good to have a good snapshot of who's living in the neighborhood. And so here we see that Staten Island has about 500,000 people living here, and it's about 6% of the overall New York City population. 60% are white, 18% are in New York City. And you see even within Staten Island, we have a great variation in the demographics of the community districts. For example, St. George Stapleton is very fairly diverse, with 22% Black, 30% Latino, 38% white, whereas Tottenville and Great Hills is 84%. Is it Tottenville? Is 84% white. And you can also see that you have some differences between these community districts in terms of the percent of the population born outside the U.S., where 24% in St. George and Stapleton, and 15% in Tottenville and Great Hills. Similarly, some differences with language proficiency. You can also see how this compares to the rest of New York City. The next section is social and economic conditions. And so here, as I mentioned earlier, we have quite a range of social and economic indicators, things that, again, that you might not expect to see in a community health profile, and really trying to, again, move away from this idea that it's personal characteristics and personal behaviors that affect health, and really more around community level factors. And so you see here we have absenteeism, and one might wonder, how does absenteeism impact health? Well, absenteeism clearly impacts the health of a child who's not going to school, but it also might be disruptive to other children in the school, and so maybe they're not getting what they need in terms of education and other resources. We have education, economic stress, gentrification, which is something that the health department is doing a lot around trying to understand the impacts of gentrification, jail incarceration, and helpful neighbors. Helpful neighbors is also something that we're trying to look into a little bit more, the idea that kind of a togetherness in a neighborhood promotes health rather than people being socially isolated and not kind of getting tapped into the resources they need. So violence is definitely one of the community level indicators we wanted to look at. And to try to quantify violence, we looked at non-fatal assault hospitalizations. So really thinking that that indicator captures the consequences of community violence. And so I'm showing here the results for St. George Stapleton, which has a higher rate of hospitalizations, non-fatal assault hospitalizations compared to the rest of Staten Island and New York City. The lowest is Bayside, Long Neck, which only has 8%, a rate of 8 per 100,000. So I mentioned already the idea of social cohesion. Here we asked through our community health survey the questions: do you feel that your neighbor are willing to help one another, which we think is a proxy for cohesion in the neighborhood. There's a lot of different questions you can ask. This one we felt comfortable with. This is what people seem to understand. Do you feel you could answer this question about your neighborhood? Do you feel like your neighbors are willing to help one another? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, good. I think people really kind of are able to answer that question, so that's why we wanted to get at that. So here we are showing South Beach Willowbrook, which had 82%, and Staten Island, 83%, higher than the rest of New York City. So I feel like this is probably a good indication that Staten Island has stronger social cohesion than the rest of the city. However, in the highest is Tottenville and Great Hills, which may be among the highest, I'm not sure, but in the city. I think that's a really great indicator for that health. The next domain that we look at is housing and neighborhood conditions. And here we really wanted to look at this because, again, the environment that you live in can really help you or hurt you in terms of your well-being and your health. And so we looked at things like air conditioning, air pollution, housing quality, in terms of maintenance defects in housing stock, bicycle network coverage, so obviously we have more bike lanes, more people riding bikes, it's a healthier behavior, pedestrian injury, we want people to feel safe on the sidewalks and walking, so we wanted to look at that, and then food environment. So air pollution. So this is one of the ones where lower is better. And this is a indicator of particulate matter, 2.5, we call it fine particulate matter. This has been shown to be kind of the worst in terms of health impacts. It's the smallest piece of air pollution that can kind of get into your respiratory system. And so the lowest in city is Rockaway Broad Channel. Yeah, maybe it's the sea air or something like that. And New York City is 7.5, but South Beach, Willowbrook, and Staten Island are doing better than the city in that those levels are lower. here. So hopefully that infographic is a little bit helpful for you to understand the cloud and air pollution. I talked a little bit about bicycle network coverage. And so I mentioned already that bike lanes are important to make it easier and safer for folks to ride bikes more often. And so we're really trying to create a biking culture, a safe biking culture in New York City. Here is where Staten Island does a little bit worse than the rest of the city. We have St. George and Stapleton and Staten Island here at 3 and 4% compared to New York City, which is 10%. So that means 10% of the streets have bike lanes in them versus Crown Heights and Prospect Heights, which has 45%. So that is something to keep in mind should anyone in the community be interested in establishing more bike lanes. When we talk about safety of pedestrians, we have pedestrian injury and hospitalizations. Here, Staten Island is doing a little bit worse than New York City, and St. George and Stapleton is a little bit, has a higher number of hospitalizations than Staten Island, compared to the lowest, which is Greenwich Village, so which kind of makes sense. It's very, kind of a center with lots of sidewalks and people, so it makes sense that it would be a little bit safer. Our next domain is maternal and child health. These are very important outcomes that we wanted to describe at the community level because there are disparities that exist in terms of pregnancy outcomes. And so we describe those here. It's a new section this year, so you haven't seen that before. Childhood obesity is one of the outcomes that we share here. And here we see that St. George and Stapleton has similar obesity prevalence of childhood obesity, which is basically, the percent of children in public schools, K through 8, who have elevated body mass index. So there's similar rates between St. George, Staten Island, and New York City, while the financial district has very low rates of childhood. Right. It is a prevalence, but there's still, there's probably not a lot of kids there. Okay. Childhood hospitalizations and emergency department visits. So we looked at avoidable hospitalization, and what we call an avoidable hospitalization is something that could be prevented were someone to access quality and timely preventive care or outpatient care. So we consider them preventable because they really shouldn't be going to the hospital for these conditions. So here we see that the rate in St. George and Stapleton and in Staten Island are lower than New York City overall, which is good. But you see some differences between St. George and Stapleton, which has a rate of 400 per 100,000 versus Staten Island, which is 207 per 100,000. And the lowest is Borough Park with 118 per 100,000. And then childhood asthma emergency department visits. So this is, again, we feel like with proper asthma management and treatment, as well as proper treatment and then maybe removal of pests and mold within the house, that there should be ways to avoid going to the emergency department for asthma. And here you see in St. George and Stapleton, the rate is higher than that of Staten Island, but both are lower than New York City. While the lowest is the financial district. The financial district is doing great. Okay, so the next section is healthy living. These are things that we often think about as individual behaviors, but again, I want to just remind you of the context that we talked about, that an individual behavior is really relative to the neighborhood that you're living in and kind of the stressors that you face. So here we talked about self-reported health, we talked about smoking, physical activity. We know that these behaviors are associated with poor health outcomes like hypertension and diabetes, so we definitely want to try to talk about these here. So this first indicator, we call it self-reported health. It really is a great proxy for health. We just simply ask someone, how would you report your health? Excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. And people pretty much answer the way they feel, and this indicator correlates with other health conditions. So here, Tottenville and Great Hills and Staten Island are 88 and 81% respectively, a little bit higher than New York City. But the Upper West Side is the highest.
They're doing really well there on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, but you know, Staten Island is pretty high, higher than New York City, so that's great. And then I talked a little bit about physical activity. The federal guidelines recommend that adults get 150 minutes of moderate exercise each week. So in South Beach, Louisville, 70% of adults report that they get 150 minutes of exercise in each week. Sorry.
It's not actually measuring, it's just any activity in the last 30 days.
Okay, so,
A little bit.
okay, so this is any activity, not the recommended amount.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So it would probably be lower if we were to ask this question about activity. Thank you, Kinjia. I should introduce Kinjia Hinterland, who is the author of these reports and is the expert.
It's a team effort, I can't take credit.
Yes, keeps you on track. So, so this is any physical activity, which is what it says here. Oh, we're gonna read it. Staten Island and the community of South Beach and Willowbrook are doing relatively similar to New York City. The highest is the financial district, Greenwich Village, Soho. And then in terms of eating fruit and vegetables each day, we asked, again, a little bit below bar, we asked how many people eat at least one serving of fruit and vegetables per day. And so we had very high marks for that. But again, it's just one. So, but it's a good, and I think people can easily recall, like, if they've eaten one, so that's kind of why we asked that question. Healthcare. Everyone deserves access to medical care. Having quality access, high quality care includes having health insurance, number one, and then avoiding getting routine care so that you're not going to the hospital, as we talked about before, and getting vaccinated for preventable diseases. I didn't mention falls, but here we have it, falls-related hospitalizations. So we used hospitalization data to see who was coming to the hospital for falls in terms of people who are 65 years of age and older. And so the rates in South Beach and Willowbrook and Staten Island are higher than New York City. In this case, in South Beach, twice as much as New York City. I'm not sure if you are familiar with these rates, but I think the health department does know about this, and they're trying to understand why there's higher rates of falls in Staten Island. But this is definitely something of concern when it comes to older adults, because it can be very debilitating and can worsen their further health outcomes. We talk about vaccinations. We have HPV, which is the vaccine that protects against cancers like HPV. It is lower in Tottenville and Staten Island than the rest of New York City. It's highest in Hunts Point and Longwood. The flu vaccination is also a little bit lower in Staten Island, and specifically Tottenville and Great Hills, and the highest is the Upper West Side. So, getting to the last section, which is the health outcomes. Again, we kind of presented these last to kind of show you how the kind of neighborhood and individual factors kind of play out first, and then the ultimate consequence is the health outcome. So we described a very wide range of health outcomes, including obesity, diabetes, hypertension, infant mortality, mental health, binge drinking, premature death, and life expectancy. And I think when you think about it, when someone says a community health profile, these are the outcomes that they expect to see, just to reiterate that point. So infant mortality. So infant mortality has been decreasing citywide, so that's a good thing. I think the citywide rate is, let's see, well, this is from 2015, but the citywide rate is 4.4 deaths per 100,000 live births. As you see, St. George's Stapleton has a bit higher rate than that, almost 7 deaths, which is not good. There's a lot of disparities that exist within infant mortality in the city, and I think that's reflected here. The Black population has an elevated infant mortality rate compared to whites, and so that's likely driving this increase in St. George and Stapleton. It's higher than the rest of Staten Island, it's higher than New York City, and Upper East Side is generally low. And I should mention this, are you all familiar with Take Care New York? Take Care New York 2020 has a goal. This is our city's health policy, our city's health agenda. I think we've had folks come to talk to you about that before. Our goal here, this is one of our indicators. We have a goal of getting the rate less than 4.4%. So I think we're on track. So, and I think I may have seen more recent data that indicates we're there. And then again, I mentioned premature death here, and that's death before the age of 65, and the way we show it here are what we call the stack bar charts. And so we show the neighborhood of interest versus New York City, and then we show the rank of, like the rank of the disease, so the highest to the lowest. This rank is for St. George Stapleton, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whereas this rank is the New York City rank. So you can compare to see how St. George Stapleton is doing against New York City. And so, so it's doing worse. And the rank of disease are cancer is number 1, as it is in New York City. Heart disease is number 2, as it also is in New York City. Drug-related deaths is number 3, as it also is in New York City. And then it starts to shift a little bit. HIV is number 4. HIV is not one of the top 5 in New York City. So, is that right? And then diabetes is number 5, and diabetes is number 5 in New York City. So not only the rank is the magnitude. So you see in St. George and Stapleton, the rate is so much higher of 55.1 versus 46.2. And then heart disease also very high, 45.5 versus 32.9. So these are important things to think about when you're thinking about what is really affecting the different communities. And then we also have a map where we show the life expectancy. And this is really just to give a sense of, like, again, how the life expectancy compares across New York City. And here we show, this map looks the same for every profile, right? But we highlight the community of interest. And so here we're just highlighting St. George and Stapleton, whose life expectancy is 79 years, which is low compared to the rest of Staten Island and the rest of New York City. So these dark blue areas, do they look familiar? The same areas that we're highlighting in the map that I showed earlier, and the same areas that have been like resulting in racial and economic segregation due to some of these redlining policies that I talked about earlier. We show these maps all the time. The same areas light up as the darker kind of areas that have worse outcomes. So that's it for the data. I do want to just tell you a little bit about how you can find out more. I forgot to mention that I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Epidemiology. So what does that mean? We collect a lot of data, we do a lot of pulse surveys, we have birth and death data, we create these publications, we have a website that we have tools, all these publications are on our website. We have different interactive tools that you can use to like learn a bit more, maybe see other things that you're not seeing here. If anyone is interested in doing a deeper dive into this data, you can do that on our website. So if you are specifically interested in the community health profiles, just go to nyc.gov and search community health profiles. Or you can email us at profiles@health@nyc.gov, which is not on here. But here's also the website, if you can't remember the email address. You can also, if anyone is really ambitious, they might want to actually download the data set. We have a data set, you can analyze it yourself. We also have maps of kind of similar to, I think, I don't know how to go backwards, but to the life expectancy map that shows each indicator for all of New York City, if you just want to get a quick visual for all of New York City. Yeah, and then coming soon, we'll have, we are not sure if we're going to do these printed versions anymore. We're hoping to have a tool that you can go online and kind of generate them yourself based on your interests. So stay tuned for that. If we do that, we'll probably come back and tell you about it. So we'll see you again soon. And that's it. Any questions?
I have one. What data did you use? Did you get the data from hospitals or to assemble this information?
Yes. So a lot of different data sets, and in the back we have a.
It's online in the.
Oh, the notes aren't in there.
There's some limited notes in the actual report. There's more detailed metadata in the, if you go to the website in the downloadable data set.
Yeah, okay. So, but a lot of the data come from our community health survey, which is a survey that we do every year that is in my division, where we ask about 10,000 New Yorkers questions, a range of questions, about half an hour's worth of questions about all sorts of things. And usually the underneath the figure it'll say the source. So a lot of those questions come from the community health survey. Otherwise, we're using administrative data that is either coming from agencies, the health department, or New York State, or Department of Education, or city planning, other government organizations that we kind of get the data, we compile it in community districts. And I forgot to mention the reason why we use community districts is it really is the lowest level of government, as you know. And we can get the data in that format and with enough statistical rigor to show it to you. Any lower, we might not be able to do it reliably, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Happy last day.
Thank you very much.
I'm honored to be presenting.
Very kind of you. Thank you.
You're not retiring from your resources, right? You'll still be around in the
I'll
community.
be back.
This will last for a little bit.
So, moving along with the rest of the meeting, we did not have any correspondence this month. Does anybody have any old business to bring up?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment, since I'm old, is I want to wish everybody well. It's been a fine trip on the community board. I've met some of the finest people who are my wonderful friends today, both present and past. So it's been a great run, and I thank you all and wish you all well.
Thank you again.
And can I have my?
Yes.
Oh, right. Who said there wasn't a
You get some
purpose?
heat.
Yeah.
Well,
For the
nobody's
original.
gonna use your name, so.
You know, in the past, we
never
actually
know.
used to replace the nameplates
Oh,
on
you
the
could
placards,
slide them out.
but they don't do that anymore now. Now they go and they do the whole
Do the whole
new,
thing.
they do the whole thing.
This is when
It
the
was up
original
until
great.
just recently, because I remember when, Joe Borelli came and we had to make the plate for him, we took off the old one thinking, and they were like, no, we're not doing it that way anymore.
So they used to slide out and the person's
they-
name would be in?
They're
No,
like
you just
cameras, but it's
unscrew
just
them.
like a little peg that they
Okay.
used to just take out.
Oh, the sliding ones are even, that's what we
Yes.
use.
They have a little pen. All right, then just for new business, I just want to let everybody know that unfortunately, we are probably going to have a meeting in August for city planning for these new text amendments that they're bringing up.
Oh, God.
I'm going to request that the meeting be during the day though.
Good idea.
I'm
So,
away the first and second week, so unless they can go.
Good idea. Yeah, it's a biggie.
I am gonna try and get it during the day because I think it's going to be a rather long meeting by the time they go through everything. So, but we don't have a date and time or anything for them yet, so. But they have reached out to us and it looks like there will be.
Thank you for my word at that time.
Yeah.
Yes. Does anybody have anything else to bring up? Under the business? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Can I just did everybody have a chance to look through their minutes? Brooke had sent them ahead of time to everybody.
Yeah.
Motion to accept?
Okay, Dana first, Jerry second. Okay, motion passes. All right, can I entertain a motion to adjourn? Megan first, Chris second. Meeting is now adjourned.